Perfect. So I see that we have quite a few people joining us today. Welcome. And if this is your first time coming to our FIC Coalition meeting, we are more than happy to have you. We have a few things on our agenda today. So like always, we are going to start off with Chris Gray, who is our lobbyist. And Chris is going to be going over some of the government side of things, what we're looking at. He has a couple questions out for the group. And then we will move on to talking about reopening stages. And there are quite a few different groups across the province that has been doing some work when it comes to figuring out what type of information is being sent out for reopenings and what is being considered. So we'll speak to these various groups. I know Quebec has been working really hard on that, so we will talk to Quebec about that. BC has a group. And then I saw Rob on the call from PEI, so if Rob wants to give an update about creating a team, that would be great. And I know that there's a team being made in Alberta as well and Saskatchewan, so we will see if there's any updates or what the overall idea is. And then we do want to discuss a survey that we sent out on Monday, which was on reopenings and kind of what the results were from that survey, as well as kind of a communal message moving forward. So that's kind of the outlook for today's meeting. And then again, always feel free to let us know if you have questions, concerns during the meeting as well. So with that, I will pass it over to Chris here.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Tricia. And again, it's great to be here and great to see everyone. As Tricia said, I'll give a little bit of an update on what we've been seeing so far on the rent subsidy, and then have a couple of questions for you folks as well. So Tricia and I had a call on Monday with the Minister of Small Businesses office, who's really been spearheading the commercial rent subsidy program from the federal government's standpoint. And to be honest with you, it was a little bit disappointing, I guess I'll call it that way, Tricia, in that it almost appears that the federal government has launched the program and they've put it out there, but they're really now reliant on the provinces to do the implementation. So she put upon us to say, continue the advocacy, continue the outreach that our organization has been doing towards the provinces to trying to ensure that the landlord is complying or buying into the program, and also passing that on, obviously, to the tenants, who is you. So it was again a little bit frustrating on that, and I've gone back and forth with our contact there, and she still owes me an email back. I emailed her again this morning, Tricia, to try and get some more answers from her on more details on how this will be continue to roll out and continue to work. So that's kind of it for the update on that. With that, I'm curious to know how members are feeling about the program, where it's working and where it's not working. And I know we had the example of what's happening in Quebec last week, and I'm curious to know, is it working better in some provinces than other provinces? And obviously I know Quebec is not working very well at all.
So I just want to add to that, when we did speak to the contact there, it was honestly all about us continuing to reach out to our provincial governments in order to make sure that there is a plan that works well for us. And earlier this week, we did send out an opinion piece from Scott about what we would like to see, as well as what would work for the industry, or the fact that the industry does need more support. And if there's any ideas about what provinces need in particular or specifically, if you would like to share that with the group, that would be great.
From conversations I've had with some folks on this call, it doesn't sound like landlords are very receptive to this program at all. It sounds like many landlords are, it's almost like a game of chicken. We're just waiting until the government comes back with a better proposal. That's the general feedback I've received from many of you on this call.
Yeah,
and that's across the country.
Yeah, that was actually one of like the biggest pieces that we discussed in our meeting, was the fact that we as an industry are trying to make it work, but it's actually the tenants that are struggling with their landlords, because the landlords don't seem to want to take in on that program. So we did.
I don't know if you've had any contact with other groups, retail associations, landlord groups specifically, to see how they view the program, but it does seem like they are, landlords in general, so this isn't lumping everybody together. Well, sorry, this is lumping everybody together, but I don't mean to, are not very receptive to this program and are almost just waiting it out.
With my particular landlord, they can't even take advantage of the program because their building does not have a mortgage anymore. So it's that people who are actually just property owners and still leasing space are not even considered in the business lease or rent program that the government has set up. So that's a downfall. So I'm still forced to pay the operating costs at a minimum, or else I would then be viewed as basically not, I forget the term, but basically ignoring my lease agreement, and they could then evict me. So there's help in that side, but the disappointment is that the government is not considered people who have property that might no longer have a mortgage.
Yeah, that has definitely come up. I've seen that both in the media, and also I do know that the Retail Council is working on that as well. So this is just good information for me to be able to go back to the minister's office to continue to press them, because I have seen rumblings that they are, and like many of the programs the government has unveiled, because things are coming fast and furious, they have to amend them or change them. So, and I know that we had a proposal put forward where, Scott, we were talking about having the tenants be able to access the program and not specifically the landlord. So I haven't heard anything more on that, but the issue of where property owners do not have a mortgage anymore has definitely come up in different forums.
Has the program, this is Bilal from Motion Fitness in Saskatchewan, the program hasn't been rolled out yet, has it?
No, it's coming. Yeah, I mean, you have to go apply on the CMHC's website.
Oh, you can apply on the CMHC website already. I did not know that.
I don't know. It's not quite open yet. Hang on a second here. Just looking here.
As far as I know, it hasn't actually been rolled out yet.
Yeah.
And because we own a couple of properties as well, so we would have access. But what I've been hearing is that there's a lot of REITs that own buildings where there's no mortgages and they're using their own money. But I believe the government is looking at changing that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, they are for sure. Yeah, it says it's still on the CMHC's website. It's saying it's still being finalized exactly how the funds will be dispersed. So I'm sure that they're still contemplating the issues that we're putting forward to them, as well as other groups like the Retail Council, particularly again on the where someone doesn't have a mortgage, right? Like they need to figure out those not loopholes, not the right word, but those intricacies of the program and how they're going to manage that.
What's Ontario done? I believe I heard Doug Ford this morning mention that how they've because I think it's the evictions. If you can take the eviction route with the provincial government to mandate that no evictions for the next 6 or 8 or 10 months, and which forces the landlords to use the programs, that may be a better way to go.
Yeah, no, that may be. I didn't see what Ford said this morning yet, but and that's part of the problem with this too. a bit of my frustration's been, again, with the federal government saying, here's the program. They need to continue to be the driver and massage this, because then you're going to have different provinces doing different things. I mean, they did come to an agreement with the provinces that this is a good thing and that they will be doing it, but they still need to be the drivers of it. And I know it comes up. There's a daily call that the industry minister's office has, and this is like every day they're talking about this as well. I mean, among the wage subsidy program as well.
It's Dave Hardy here. Just a little update from us. 108 studios in Canada. The landlords have been very quiet. I know that the comments from them, and everyone sort of mentioned it here, a number of the landlords don't have mortgages, or they aren't sure how these are going to be affected. The other one that seems to make the landlords a little concerned is that the funds go to the mortgage holder, not the landlords. And so they're concerned that the mortgage holder is just going to take all this money and apply it against mortgage and principal. And they almost have to pay it to the mortgage holder because they have the security on the property. What no one is talking about so far with landlords is that what banks have been prepared to do. So almost all landlords are eligible for principal and interest deferrals from their banks for up to 6 months. All 5 national big banks have said that in Canada, and almost all the credit unions. And so essentially interest.
Dave Freeze.
Dave, we lost you, I think.
Oh, there he is.
I know, someone called me. Anyways, banks can get their interest to be deferred and then added on to the principal, and they can get their mortgage terms extended. And no one's really talking about that, which is an opportunity for them. I do believe that there's still a lot of things that the landlords we are hearing from, like I had 108 landlords calling us on at the end of March. The end of April, it was like crickets. Everybody's trying to figure out what this program is. And you kind of have to think about timelines. Trudeau announced a program on the 16th of April. They gave limited details on the 24th. And we've been waiting, now two weeks for the provinces to come out. So we've kind of advised our franchisees it's kind of like in sales. Chris, would you like to buy a membership? The person that speaks next loses the sale. If you can just not say anything, Chris will respond and go, yes, I'd love to buy a membership. So that's kind of what we're saying right now is wait for details. Time is on our side. And there are some landlords that are providing some of these eviction notices. The group that we know of right now that if you want to support a group, there's a group in Canada called Save Small Business Coalition, and they're asking for a ban on evictions until September 30th. The other part of this, and this is kind of going on a bit of a tangent, but Scott and I have had this discussion as a Tricia. As an industry, I don't want to be the first ones in here. I want to be more towards the end of it, in part because we've seen some experience in some of our other studios worldwide that people are going to be a little more anxious about going in quickly. And I think public sentiment will be more on our side. There was a big announcement today that came out that sort of, in my mind, helps us in that Trudeau did say that they are going to extend the support for laid off workers past June 30th. Well, as long as the government is mandating as an industry that we have to stay closed for the public good, and the fact that Trudeau now has also shown that they're prepared to extend this beyond June 30th tells me that they're likely to also extend the Canadian Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program if in fact we are mandated to stay closed. So assuming the landlords and the provincial governments can come together, which I think they kind of have to at some point. It's about playing a bit of chicken. And now seeing today's announcement, I'm a little more bullish on the fact that that this is going to work out. But again, first person to talk loses. Chris, do you want that membership?
Yeah, I guess that's me. I didn't want to do it, but no, it's a good point. I think, as you said, Dave, the government continues to move and evolve very quickly on this, and going at it. Obviously, I anticipated that they would extend that program, and I think that you're right that they will extend this program as well, as we see governments and provinces continue to have closures that will probably lead into the summer and early fall, if you are reading the tea leaves, right? So they will have to amend and continue along and provide the necessary supports that Canadians and businesses require.
There's one other little piece I'm going to add to that, and this comes out of our U.S. operations. We're just starting to open our stores in the States right now, and what we're seeing and what our inclination is down there is, and the U.S. is going about it completely different than Canada. They're kind of saying, this is too much of a high cost. One of the numbers that came out to me is that 96% of the people that have passed away in New York, they've traced back to having some pre-existing conditions. A comorbidity, they're calling it. That they just don't die of COVID. They had something else, and the COVID just kind of exacerbated it. So what's kind of coming out from what we're hearing is that there's a high likelihood that it's not that they're going to go back to a shelter-in-place situation again. What's likely to happen is states, depending on how their outbreaks come, will extend the length of time that it takes to open more non-essential businesses that are higher risk. So the other part of that is if your gym, so in New York, in Texas, for example, you're allowed to have up to 25% capacity of your fire code. So for a big gym, if your fire code had you having 200 people, now you're allowed to have 50. Although you may be open and you thought you'd go from 50 to 75 to 100, there's a possibility that if they probably won't close you again, but they may hold you at 50 members for a year. In our case, we're seeing our studios open with 12 people in them. We can't make money at 12 people, and that's our thought is, especially if there's this government rent program in place, we're better off waiting for a while. And that's all I have to say.
Can I also ask, while I have you, and I need to drop off in about 5 minutes here, but how is the do you have any thoughts on the wage subsidy program, and how is that working or not working for you guys?
Well, we applied for it here in Saskatchewan for Motion Fitness. This is Bilal again.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't actually seen the payment from the government as of yet. I think they said 7 to 10 days. So that puts us into next week sometime. So we've been able to bring back everyone who qualifies, basically everyone who receives more than $2,000. Basically anyone who's $2,400, they're willing to come back. Everyone else, we've seen some resistance and some humming and hawing, so we've kind of left those people alone. But that's what we've done here, and I hope once we get the payment, I'm assuming it works well. It's pretty easy to apply for. There's a few windows you have to fill in. Once you've ran your payroll, we use a payroll service, so those windows are easy to fill in because the totals are already there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we are waiting for the first one, and I hope we get the money, because otherwise I'm kind of screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I think that is it from me, Tricia, unless there's any other questions. What I will do again right after this is I will recirculate back to the minister's office again and let her know what's going on with this call right now, and again provide the updates that they probably know about, but it's always good for them to hear it again. And when I get an update from them, I'll definitely let you know.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And I'm sure we will keep in touch, and then we will see you again next week.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
So this will be a segue for us to move on to discussing reopening. So what we'll do is we'll just quickly go over, Scott, myself, and Graham will just go over some of the results and the feedback that we received from the survey that we sent out this week. And then from there, we can talk to the different provinces, the provincial groups that have been created. If you are not on a provincial group, but you want to be involved, this is a great time to make your connections as well. So we will take it from here. So Scott, if you wanted to start us off.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So just looking at the feedback from the survey, as well as having personal conversations with many folks here, URSA has come up with some great guidelines to use as a framework. And Tricia sits on the weekly Global Federations call. So those guidelines revolve around 4 key pillars: containment, cleaning and sanitization, staffing, and operations. And then within each of those, there's more subcomponents. So really recommend that the provinces look at that guideline as a framework for this. But also, when approaching government, use the tried, tested, and true concept of CRC: commend, recommend, commend. And some of the feedback we got from the survey was, very frustrated. Some folks are pretty angry, and that's to be expected with these types of things. But picking a fight at this point probably isn't going to help us at all. So we want to commend government for what they've done in terms of trying to keep Canadians safe, and then make our professional recommendations in terms of our industry based on your province. Timing is another thing that we probably won't have 100% agreement on as individual groups, but general consensus is we don't want to be last. Lumping a fitness facility in with a nightclub or a sporting event doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to anybody. But if we're first, that also has consequences, such as, if your members aren't confident in the product, you experience mass cancellations or freezes and then be expected to pay full rent. So timing is a little tricky, but I think we're aligned where we don't want to be last. But should we be first? That's the big question out there, and each province is going to vary a little bit. I think there's some benefit with consumer confidence. If they can go to get a haircut and they do that with confidence, then they're going to be more likely to come to a facility. But us proposing to the government our guidelines, I think will go a long ways, because they're really waiting for that. Otherwise, they have to create it themselves. And if you just look at Alberta, I think they lumped gyms and facilities with nightclubs and sporting events, likely because they're not educated on what we actually can and are capable of doing. They might, the people that make the rules, maybe they belong to a large rec center, and it's kind of chaotic at times, and they don't understand we have technology and we have cleaning systems and solutions and processes to really help guide traffic. I honestly believe that our facilities, whether it was a studio or a club, prior to us closing, were some of the cleanest places you could be, definitely cleaner than any grocery store I've seen. So I think that's our recommendation is commend, make the proper recommendations using that framework, and then timing. Each province has a different strategy. Some provinces haven't even let us know what the strategy is. Definitely not last, but maybe somewhere in the middle. And then the other thing we need to do is also continue to lobby for support post-opening if we are subject to constraints, such as X amount of people in the facility at the time, and if we're expected to pay full rent, full op costs, what kind of support do we need as a organization, as a business, to be able to make those commitments. So anyways, that's a lot. I said it all at once very quickly. So.
And Scott, actually, if I can just add to that, Graham here. Just kind of going through the survey. So we actually had a really good response, about 89 people responding in a couple of days. So that's pretty good. And just kind of doing a non-scientific look at the numbers there, I think a majority of respondents are suggesting a middle to later stage opening. And there were some points, obviously, for those looking at an earlier versus late stage opening. So As an example, some of those that were recommending an earlier opening were saying that basically their bills are piling up. They can't survive much longer until if they don't get things up and running again. One of the biggest points for sure was that getting the facilities back up and running is key to like the physical and mental well-being of Canadians. So that was definitely one of the main points that these operators are advocating for.
And just, Graham,
yeah.
one real quick point there. That's great. I'm glad you brought that up. I think there's an opportunity. Dave talked about core morbidity. Letting people know that the industry is here for Canadians today and tomorrow for their physical and mental well-being. And also, I think we should also look and plan a campaign to educate Canadians not only on the physical and mental well-being, but what we're doing in terms of our facilities and to keep them safe and protected. So when we are ready to open, I do think we should pool resources out of our group and actually look at a coordinated marketing strategy to let people know what the industry is doing to keep people safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And other respondents were indicating too that that we've already established high standards even before the pandemic was kind of fully engulfed, and they're confident that they can safely operate under controlled conditions. And especially given that it would be reduced capacity in the facility, so that does make it more manageable for social distancing and cleaning procedures and that type of thing. Also, a number of respondents sort of indicating that it might be easier for smaller studios to sort of get started earlier, just because they can control their members and the number of people in their facilities. So it's easier to manage. And then just moving over to those who are indicating like a late stage opening, late summer, early fall. Certainly safety of members and staff is a top consideration, no doubt about that. Others were indicating that they need this time, preparation time, to restructure their facility. So implementation of policies, procedures, acquisition of cleaning supplies, signage, staff training, liability waivers, all those types of things that would go along with prepping their facilities. Also indicating that summer is historically low volumes anyways, and that a later stage opening might there could be potentially like less restrictions later on down the road, so they don't have to implement all of these sort of costly changes and procedures in the interim. It also allows for like the collection of data on how other companies and businesses and industries are doing, and then that can provide the opportunity to assess that, and also obviously ensuring that the pandemic numbers are declining and continue to do so. So allows more time for that. A lot of concern about the ability to operate profitably, especially given reduced capacity with the higher costs of COVID-19 compliance combined with reduced revenues. So definitely concern there. A key point to difficulty in maintaining social distancing within facilities, just the challenges of that, and given different facility sizes and that across the board. A lot of concern that if we open too soon, you're going to have a high number of cancellations right up front from the get-go, because it's just too early and people are obviously still concerned about getting back in that environment. So opening later would allow them to retain more members potentially once things die down. And then I think one of the main points too that was brought up lastly here is a concern for damaging repercussions against the industry. If we get some kind of outbreak or something from an early staged opening of a facility and it's kind of linked back to one club, that could be serious implications for the industry as a whole. So I think working with Tricia, we'll try and summarize some of these points too of this survey, because I think there were some definitely valid and good points that were made here, and we'll make that available to the group.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. Yeah, so that survey, a lot of good feedback that we received, and if anybody has any other information or comments that they want to make according to what was asked, please feel free to let us know. One of the things that we did send out in the survey was that list of the list of things that you would want to have prepared in your club for reopening. And we had asked if anybody wanted to add to that list. And again, like Graham said, one of the big concerns is the whole idea of the cost behind these measures. So making sure you have the shields for separation, making sure you have enough hand sanitizer, enough wipes, enough tape to tape the floor with. So that was one of the reoccurring themes that we also did find, was just people not knowing if they would want to spend the funds right away and if it would be best to hold off on that. So if there's any comments on that. And I know last week we did hear from some of our suppliers who are on the call about that, and the fact that they are coming up with equipment and things to help the industry through this crisis. So if any of the suppliers here want to jump in to maybe discuss what they are doing in order to help the process, that would be great.
I could talk on behalf of North. We've been working with our facilities and our suppliers at the same time, and there's already a bit of a shortage on proper disinfectant, not sanitation. We've kind of forgotten about sanitation completely, and we're dealing with disinfectant between the wipes and the sprays. Not just because there's more health clubs now wanting them, there's more manufacturing plants, there's more restaurants. Everybody wants those things now. So once we get to opening in a couple months from now, there's going to be a severe shortage on the market. So if you're not planning, or you're not looking at purchasing that stuff now, you may be caught short. And the same goes for the soft goods. I mean, we deal with a few suppliers on soft goods, and there's already a shortage because people are stocking up on, a lot of clubs. You guys are a lot of clubs. You're not going to be reusing those bands and tubes anymore. And there's a few suppliers that we have. So, the caution is, if you're going to be changing your policy or getting rid of the old ones, finding new ones, don't get caught short. You start planning that stuff as early as possible.
Thanks, Brian. Any comments on that?
Yeah, just a little bit of an update I saw yesterday about some of the relevant issues around the opening stuff that might play into it. One positive was there was some information that came out through CBC interviewing a couple of disease experts, epidemiologists about HVAC units. And more or less the conclusion there was that an HVAC unit, that it shouldn't spread through aerosol and HVAC. So the risk of like having the AC on, because it's going to be summer months, hopefully when people are opened up, and that the HVAC unit would spread this through the air, looks very minimal and a little risk. So that I think was at least some positive in terms of at least some information that came from the science side of things. The spacing thing, there's been a little bit that's come out in the last week, and it's still very inconclusive about what the proper spacing is and where the risk is. And most of the risk is if somebody coughs or sneezes that it's going to travel. So still nothing conclusive on that, but at least some positive news on the HVAC stuff, at least like from what some Canadian researchers have sort of said about what the risk is there, which is very minimal, which I think at least was some positive between some of the information out there, and having talked to a number of sort of people who are members about what their apprehensions are. Some maybe, like Scott said, getting some of this information about what the real risks are and aren't in the gym, and then what we're doing to mitigate those, I think is really good. So mentioning something like the HVAC stuff is a good thing, or citing those researchers would be good. And then if we can get some information somewhere on some modeling around spacing and breath and that type of stuff, that would be good to kind of get out ahead of time so that we can mitigate some of that fear. Oh, the other thing is masks. People might want to have masks and gloves too.
Sorry, Nick, could you just repeat that last point you had?
Just to the last point that was made there. The one thing people might want to think about doing now is also stockpiling masks and gloves. They're increasingly hard to get. I know that a few businesses that I know that have been able to reopen, like in the construction industry and stuff like that, that was a prerequisite, and some of them had to outsource them from, getting a box of masks from overseas or something so they could have them for their employees. So just another thought of like the things that people might need to stockpile is that PPE gear, as tough as it is to find right now, it might be good to source it, and that might be something that if there is some supplier that could do it, maybe there's one supplier that could, one or two suppliers that we could come together and ask, and have a resource for that as well to start stockpiling ahead of opening.
It's Dave Hardy here. Just I heard this yesterday in our presentation, but apparently with PPE and hand sanitizer and things like wipes, there's actually an order as to who gets them in terms of priority. First priority is hospitals. Second priority is public places like train stations or LRTs, etc. And third are non-essential businesses. So as an industry, we're kind of at the bottom of the pile. And so we're certainly concerned about this as well. And we're actually sourcing it ourselves just so that we don't get left out in the cold. But what he's talking about is definitely a concern.
Yeah, I do have a friend who's got some supply from Mexico, so I don't know if that how it goes, but it might have to do some outsourcing like that, and yeah, be very cognizant of where on the list we would go, especially relative to opening.
Yeah, well, the other thing too, and I'm not sure it's going to come out, but most gym wipes actually don't have the formulation, enough alcohol in them to do anything for the COVID virus. So if you take a traditional gym wipe and wipe it over top of a piece of equipment, it just sort of smears it around. You need to have a certain alcohol content in it.
Yeah, the difference is the difference between a disinfecting wipe and a sanitizing wipe. And the disinfecting wipes obviously are more money for what they do, and they'll have a DIN. The Canadian government has a standard for that, and they'll have a DIN or DIN certification number. So we've been looking for alternates. We've just found one for the spray, actually, for the disinfecting spray with a DIN number that we've just sourced as well. So yeah, it's one of those. I totally agree. You need to start planning ahead.
Yeah, and also watch, in terms of the spray, what impact's that going to have on our equipment when you're spraying alcohol down into computer components on treadmills and bikes and things like that. That's a concern we have.
Hey guys, it's Mike from Technogym in Calgary here. It's nice to meet a lot of you online. Technogym, as you all hopefully know, we're an Italian-based company. So being an Italian-based company, we are probably about 3 weeks ahead of the North American market in terms of COVID and its effect on the fitness market. So what I'm getting from from colleagues in Italy who we're chatting with daily is as they start to plan this a few weeks ahead of where Canada sits is things like what you're going to be spraying on your equipment. David mentioned that's very important. Was as we get into equipment with some what is basically a tablet on it, what you're going to be spraying it with. So look to whoever your supplier is on what they recommend to spray, because what you do put on the equipment will affect its performance, and also what equipment is being left in the gyms. Right now, our colleagues in Italy are saying most of Europe that have access to their customers right now, the larger big box clubs are taking out all their functional equipment and only leaving cardio, every third piece of cardio, and only selectorized pin strength equipment on the floor. It's just going to be too hard for a larger facility to sanitize barbells, dumbbells, functional equipment, bands, and things like that. So they're modifying the layouts to every third piece of cardio and selectorized equipment only right now for the time being in Europe. And that's kind of Europe-wide what we're hearing from the larger club owners. So look to whoever your supply is supplying your equipment on what you're going to be spraying. And I know all this bigger manufacturers are aiding with layouts right now. If you are looking to make layout changes, I know all the major manufacturers are absolutely able to help right now for that.
Hey, Mike, while we have you on the phone, what are you hearing from Europe, given that you guys are a little bit on the front lines and Italy is certainly was on the front lines? What are you hearing about attendance and people and the comfort of people to come back to the gyms?
That's a really good question, David. I spoke with our global sales manager for clubs this morning in Cesena in Italy, and the Italians, it depends on the country. So the Italian culture being more social than perhaps the Germans or the English, they're dying to get back at it, and it's almost been too much too soon in Italy, where now there's going to be, the fear is that the second wave is going to come a little earlier, because so many people, they were in lockdown for so long, and so many people were looking to get back out, not only in the gyms, but in the squares, in the markets, in the supermarkets, back to work. So Italy right now is faced with an overindulgence of people trying to get out. There's absolutely zero, I wouldn't say zero, but there's just not a lot of hesitation to get back out into the world. Whereas our colleagues in Germany are saying they're much more hesitant and much more cautious to get back into it, even though the restrictions are starting to release. So it kind of depends on the culture and on the country. Italy is raring to go, and they're going to have to get reined back a little bit, whereas Germany, the UK, Spain are a little bit more cautious in that respect.
Thank you.
Hi, David. Hi, guys. It's Jeremy from Precor here as well. Just to Mike's point, we have actually put together a comprehensive list of cleaning products that are, non-damaging to consoles, upholstery, most specifically on the cardio side of things. So I can actually recirculate that to Tricia, and then maybe she could put it out to the group. But we have put forth a, we call it sort of a resource bounce back guide, and it lists everything from a variety of cleaning products to space planning to spacing just on the floor from what we've been sitting on endless calls with operators in the States, our EMEA group, which, as Mike outlined, we're based out of the UK for Europe, but, seeing some of the action move back and what's worked, has not worked, as well as into the Asian Pacific market as well, where they had an earlier start, but then they also had a stop as well when, to the larger society, things had to be shut down again in places like Beijing and Shanghai. So we've got some interesting information on that, and I'll forward that link over to Tricia that can circulate that among the group.
Jeremy, good to see you, pal. Quick question: disinfectant solutions and wipes, or sanitizing solutions and wipes? Are you a
combination of both?
Okay.
There's a variety of products, just because some are available in certain regions, or obviously some of them much harder to find because they've been sold out, whether it's at a Costco, wherever you might find these particular products on a state by state, province by province basis. And I think further to what everybody is discussing, what we've seen, and I've had co-workers that have witnessed open clubs, whatever policy you're opening with is going to have to be a fluid situation. You have to have a plan going in, obviously. You have to have the equipment, the cleaning products to air purifiers to whatever particular angle you decide to go with, but also expect to change those plans along the way, because there's no precedent to this, as we all know. And just the fact that people are people, as you see in the grocery stores, we have the flooring marked out. People, for the most part, as they enter, follow that. But once they get into the routine, they're well off the mark. And so whether it be a free weight bench area to the selectorized equipment, yes, every other piece will probably have to be shut off or marked. We do also have a reference for cardio equipment partitions, if anybody's interested in that. So, I mean, just trying to, whatever your particular plan is, there are places and people that are accessible on that, and I can help provide that as well.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. If you can send me that information, I will circulate it to our group as well as our membership. And I think that's going to be very beneficial.
Certainly.
Hi, this is Nasser from Matrix. Just to tie it up, I guess, with the manufacturers, along with my colleagues, we're supplying the equipment. We're also moving in the same direction. Last week, I talked about having the face shield, or on the cardio equipment. That's still something that's in progress. We're still looking at how we can fasten that, whether it's straight from the ground up or just on the back of the console frame. So that's still in design right now. We have come up now with a sanitizer holder that can go on the selectorized strength machines. So that will come out into mass manufacturing in 2 weeks. So on the frames of the strength machines, you'll have a place where you can have the gel or disinfectant holder on the strength machines. So similar to a bottle holder, but this is in addition to that. For us here locally in Canada, we're again similar lists, and we've been working with Natalie here in Quebec. But we're also looking at signage to help out the club operators. We are sourcing some masks, so in case there is shortage for some of our clients and customers, we'll have some masks for them that we've been able to bring in from Asia. In addition to that, we're also looking at our service providers. So when they go into the facilities to move the equipment around, to service the equipment, we want to make sure that our technicians and service and field technicians are also have face masks, have the face shields, and be able to disinfect after they work and be able to satisfy the site as well. We are now preparing ourselves for the reopening. So we're getting our training for all the service technicians. Our layout designers are working overtime to create new layouts with a new spacing. But we're all in this together, and we have to be dynamic and adaptable to how this market is going to change. And like Mike was saying about functional in Europe, we've heard similar things where barbells and dumbbells are the hardest to disinfect. Selectorized and cardio is definitely on the way up. And we also noticed that in corporate facilities, there's a big demand right now. We are receiving a lot of inquiries from corporate clients wanting to upgrade their equipment or even create space to have equipment there. But yeah, just to touch on there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nasser. Any more comments on this before we do a little move on to our provincial updates?
If I could just ask, if Matrix and or Technogym could, if they have any other guides that they'd be prepared to share, Tricia, if everyone could kind of send in whatever equipment guides, at least because most gym owners have a combination of equipment, it would be great if you could distribute that as well.
Yeah, 100%, David. Same as the other manufacturers. Technogym's produced a guide too, and it's we're actually in the midst of sending that out right now to clients. So I'm happy to share. It's not a problem.
Yeah, David, this is Sheldon from Free Motion Canada. Yeah, we've been working with a couple of organizations in the U.S. and we're actually following the ADA rules. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the ADA rules. So a lot of our plans and formations for customers are helping them understand what the ADA rule is. So we've done a couple floor layouts that I can share with Tricia as well that comply with that from a 10-foot and a 12-foot spacing. So I'll be able to send it over to Tricia. In terms of Nick's comment in terms of masks, I'm going to share with Tricia contact out of Alberta that seems to be producing masks for customers. They reached out to me on LinkedIn actually and just brought up their services and stuff. So I'll share that with Tricia as well. They're out of Alberta. I didn't actually research the company all that great, but they just reached out to me on LinkedIn a couple days ago. So I'll share that with Tricia. But like my other manufacturing cohorts, Free Motion's doing the same thing. We're really working hard with our service providers as well, making sure they're educated on cleaning specs. And we've also came out with a guide to follow, not necessarily in depth as Precor did in terms of what solutions, but just how to clean, what to clean, how to clean it properly, that sort of things, and just re-educating some of our service people and some of the facilities on how to do things the right way. But the last thing I wanted to just mention is just, I think everybody's has dialed into this, is communicating to customers, letting customers know, letting them be part of the process, letting them know what you're doing, how you're doing it, so that they do feel comfortable. I know here in BC, we're on phase 1 and we're looking at phase 2. Gyms are in phase 3 and some of the gyms are like, I don't really want to open in phase 3 right now. So I'm not really comfortable. But communicating to your customers on what you're doing and how you're doing it, I think is going to create a little bit less fear of going into the facilities. I know rec centers are in phase 2 and they're worried right now. They're worried about what's going to happen. So communicating to the customers, I think, is going to be very, very important from today until you open your doors.
Great, thank you, Sheldon. If anybody does not currently have my email address, I just popped it into the chat box. So if you have any documents to send me, please make sure that you do so then I can send it out to our collective here.
Tricia, I just have one question just before we move on. First of all, thank you to the manufacturers. That's very encouraging to hear the support that we're getting from them. I have a question to anyone, actually, in regards to some cleaning solutions that were mentioned. And I don't know if anyone recalls, if anyone was on the URSA calls with, I forgot his name, the fellow from Pure out there. They talked about a fogging machine, a fogging disinfecting machine. Has anyone heard or of anything like this or come into contact with anything like this? It seems like an ideal solution. I just don't know much about it. Anyone?
Yes.
I saw it in the news. Movati seems to have it. So I don't know if anybody from Movati is on. That's what they said they were going to be using.
Oh, yeah, actually, that's funny. I saw that in their article they put out in the Ottawa Star Sun recently. That's interesting. Okay, so it might be follow up with them. Okay, is anyone in Movati on?
No, this is Brian from North. I know we talked about it in our call this morning. It's about a $6,000 unit. And you've got to have the same thing, that DIN spray. It's pretty funky, but I think the unit is about $6,000 per. So
Okay.
Same thing, Tricia. If you want, I can send you the information we have.
Yeah, that'd be much appreciated.
I know that we had talked about it in our studios in the States, and I don't know a lot of details of it, other than after you use it, there has to be a period of time where no one's in the gym or the studio. So you can't go in. For us, we couldn't go between classes and do it. Our classes are 15 minutes between sessions. It's my understanding you sort of needed to have no one in there for a number of hours afterwards, and it would allow you to do it once a day, but not between classes.
Yeah, David, you're right. I think the minimum was 30 minutes, depending on your square footage. But yeah, I think the minimum was 30 minutes for it to between classes or between sessions. So.
Great, thank you. I think that's good information for everyone to share. So anything about that, I think, Brian, if you can send that over to me, that'd be great. All right, so last 5 minutes, let's get some provincial talk in. So I'll actually start off with Quebec. So if Natalie, you want to give us a quick update on what's happening.
Thanks, Tricia, and thanks everybody. I've been taking lots of notes. Really interesting what Mike said about the culture difference, which I think will apply to every province. And I don't think anybody will be surprised if I say definitely applies to Quebec. A reminder to everyone that schools are opening on Monday. Manufacturing is open in Quebec. Retail is open in Quebec, everything except Montreal. And so there are quite a few businesses, residential, the residential construction is open, the garden centers are open, etc. So it is now, it's the only province, it seems anyways, that hasn't created a phased approach to opening. They're just opening things seemingly kind of randomly. And so we need to be a part of that conversation, not to push necessarily for us to be absolutely next, but for us to be a part of the conversation. And the latest update I have today, which is a good news, bad news one, which my Quebec friends will hear for the first time because I just got off the call, is from the crisis management team at the provincial government. There is a préjugé, there is a, somebody help me, I'm running out of English now. There is a preconceived notion that gyms are indeed high risk for contagion. They think that at the government level, which is, I'm assuming, what's happened in other places where they put gyms last in terms of those. The concern from that from our end is that it's potentially incorrect, compared to our ability to sanitize versus, for example, the fabric stores that were packed over the weekend, one, because it was 20 degrees, two, because everybody wants to make their own masks. And all they did is have people hand wash at the beginning, touch everything while they were in the store, and then walk out. So all those pieces of fabric, they're like, well, people wash their hands. Versus in other clothing stores, they said, oh, well, we put the clothes they tried on in bins, and then we're going to sanitize or leave them in the back of the room and quarantine them for 2 weeks. So no one knows how to deal with what the situation is. And that's the risk in Quebec right now, is unpreparedness on our behalf. Because if they change their mind and they decide we're opening, then to everybody else's point, we won't be prepared. So our focus right now is on the reopening strategy and the reopening protocols. And the strategy for me to communicate that on behalf of the coalition here is one that's focused on explaining what the culture in a gym was way before this happened in terms of cleanliness and sanitization and all these other things, as the protocols that already took place. And then the ones that took place once this started to happen, when everybody was already upping their work as it relates to that, and now how we will reopen. To kind of break the myth a little bit that gyms are cesspools, because it seems like that seems to be where they're thinking. And we don't want to say that they're the safest place in the world and there's going to be no problem and there's absolutely no risk. We want them to make informed decisions as it relates to gyms. And so this is where we're focused on, as soon as we can be a part of the conversation with both the finance and the public health departments moving forward, which we're very hopeful will be next week. And the second part of it is recruitment. So our Quebec lobbying and PR firm here has done fantastic work creating some graphics, hoping to get as many members as part of the coalition as possible. The ask that we had was $100 a unit, $100 a location, to try and cover the fees that are involved in the lobbying efforts, as well as the PR efforts, the lobbying efforts for the government, as well as then the PR efforts with the general population, to show the safety that exists, not pretend that it's different. I know a lot of people are really struggling with risk right now, which is normal because we're very anxious. And I understand that, but it's finding that middle ground between doing the work that creates confidence and focusing on member and staff care before anything else. Health first, then fitness. And so that's where we're sitting now with our strategy with them.
Okay, thank you. If there's any other provinces that want to speak to where they're at this point?
Alberta, we just have our first meeting set for next week. I think we face very similar preconceived notions as Quebec. So our goal will be to educate ministers on fitness facilities and how we operate.
Mm-hmm. And I know BC has a group as well, if somebody from there wants to speak to it.
Yeah, hey, it's Jeff from Fitness Unlimited in Maple Ridge, BC. Yeah, as Sheldon said, they didn't, when they announced the phases on Wednesday for reopening, fitness clubs weren't included on the list, and it left a lot of confusion. Then the day after, the chief medical officer said she saw us in phase 3, which is potentially June to September with no set date. So there's still a lot of confusion with the health department as well, because they're saying it could be sooner. I know Carl from Club 16, I'm not sure if he's on the call right now, but he has a meeting with WorkSafe today, which is going to kind of, I guess, with all the rules and regulations that safety protocols that we're going to have to implement going forward. So that should be pretty interesting to hear how that turns out.
Thanks, Jeff. And oh, Dave, did you have something to say?
No, sorry. I was waving to Jeff.
Oh. Rob, if Rob's on the call, if you can just kind of give us a little update.
Yeah, I'm still here. PEI here. You know, we're in phase 3 of the reopening for the island. It's slated for potentially on June 12th as the reopening date. And I guess they put that as a potential because they might shift it as things kind of move along here on the island. I'm still working on contacting some other fitness business owners here on the island to kind of establish a little bit of a team and see what recommendations we're going to put forth to the Minister of Health and Chief Medical Officer, because again, we're getting the same stuff as everybody else, and it's just very general guidelines on the social distancing side of things. So hopefully, I, like everybody else here, taking lots of notes and great recommendations coming down from URSA and the rest of this coalition. So hopefully we can put that forth. And again, just like everybody said on this call, easing the concerns of the members that are coming in and the general population out there, and keeping them informed about the cleaning practice that we've had beforehand and when we upped our game and what we're going to do going forward in these very trying times. So that's where we're at, and it would be great to see the kind of timelines across the country of when fitness centers are planning on opening and in what phases, what the timeline is. We're June 12th, and I've seen a couple other people on here saying, the kind of June-ish to September-ish and whatever it is. It'd be interesting to see when people are opening up, when clubs are planning on opening up, and kind of, take a look on what their success rate and kind of learning from that as we go along.
Hello, it's Mo. I just wanted to say I have a contact for a fogging unit company that's been used for golf courses and hair salons. So I put the website in the chat, and I have the email connection to Diana House, the CEO. I'll add that in the chat as well. Apparently it's a product of choice for those industries.
Great, thank you, Mo. And then I see Lisa left a comment here as well in the chat box about Alberta and how she's learned from her lawyer that outdoor activities such as one-on-one training is illegal. And she has also found that about 65% of their memberships is refusing to return if masks are mandatory. So Lisa, if there's anything we want to add to that, as well as outdoor group activities, she added. So that's something to definitely think about. Any other final comments we have?
Yeah, just Nick here again. I just want to, kind of harp on the same point about the approach now that things are sort of settling in for everybody. There's definitely a number of opportunities to make revenue. I think one that's kind of come up more in this conversation is equipment rental. I know a few people I've talked to, while they were shut down, they rented equipment. It's almost impossible for consumers to be able to buy kettlebells, dumbbells, bands, things like that, pretty much in a lot of areas in the country right now. And if you're not going to be able to open with that equipment necessarily out on the floor, in the short term now while you're not open, and in the long term when you can open with limited equipment, there's a revenue opportunity there to potentially rent it to your members as a way of keeping them engaged, especially those that would be interested in that functional stuff. Along with looking at, the thing I keep talking about, which is sort of programming as a service, converting people into, more limited training where at least you're giving them a program they can do at home and they can stay engaged. You can do that now while you're closed. And then as you open, look at having people come in less frequently and just get put through their program, and then that they can do it at home. So the combination of being able to rent equipment, do programming as a service in addition to access, it's just thinking about things that you can do right now that it could be driving some revenue while you're closed, that work when you're sort of open at a limited capacity, and that could still continue to work potentially when you're open at a full capacity, whenever that is in the future. I mean, just to start thinking, changing the mindset a little bit, to start thinking about that, about where those opportunities are. So I'll keep trying to put some content out about that, maybe update the playbook that I did on a few other things that I've heard, and how you can kind of frame this stuff. But I think the equipment rental is both a great way of keeping people engaged. And if anybody's done that and has a model of it, I think that'd be really great to share how they've, what kind of forms or contracts or licenses, if there's a template for that, how that can supplement programming, which can be done right now, even with the facilities closed, and can be a hybrid, in-person and online model once you're sort of partially open, and then can continue. So just to think about stuff that can put dollars in now and in the medium term, and then hopefully continue in the long term, because as we all know, the consumer expectations have really changed as people have been working out at home, and there's a lot of evidence showing around that as well. So just something that, you know, is really thinking about being both good for today and future proof. So I'll keep putting content out about that, and if people have suggestions about stuff, I'm also trying to put together a calculator on our site right now to calculate like revenue based off of a few assumptions based off of the size of your facility and spacing regulations and the number of members and different things that you could think of, different programs you could think of charging for, and so what the revenue potential is there. So just anything that anyone can share with me in that sense, or anything they'd like to see, I'm happy to put it together. Just thinking more about innovatively how to be driving revenue today and in the future.
If I can just speak real quick about equipment rentals as an equipment manufacturer, just be very wary of putting your own equipment out to end users. There's been a lot of reports in Europe of you know, again, being a few weeks ahead of what's happened in North America, where equipment has been rented to a person's home, to somebody's home. They've injured themselves by using that equipment improperly, and now there's some law cases that have come back, and the club owners are not insured properly to rent out equipment. So just be careful of the liabilities of putting your owned equipment out to your members' houses, because if you put a spin bike out to somebody's place and their kid gets tangled up in the back flywheel for any reason, it's back on you. So that's already happened a few times in Europe. So just you know, as a manufacturer of equipment to club operators, be very wary of rentals without knowing your insurance policies really well and what that might look like.
Great, thank you for that. That's very good information. If you haven't noticed the chat box yet, we do have some more information. So Mo provided the email address of Diana House, the CEO of Go Fog It. So if you want to look into that, gofogit.com, and you can also contact her. And Brian here says the product I mentioned earlier on the call for misting is emist.com. So there is another option available there. All right. So that being said, thank you everybody for your participation today. I do want to remind everybody who's on the call that if you are currently not a member of Fitness Industry Council of Canada, please do make sure that you become a member of us, because that is what is going to allow us to continue bringing the industry together and fighting the good fight. But not fighting, we are supporting each other. So please do check out our website, ficdn.ca/memberships, to make sure that you do connect in and become a member with us. And same place, same time next week. I will send out invites shortly and hope to discuss with all of you again soon. And I will send out the video recording of this meeting, as well as any additional notes or links that were mentioned in the meeting.